Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. My name is Patricia Anderson. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be your producer for today's webinar. We're coming to you with a special edition of our first Monday's webinar, a little bonus for you here to celebrate leap year and an election year all at the same time. How lucky are we? We've got so much to discuss. And as you're getting settled, just want to let you know that this is a webinar format, so you can see and hear the presenters, but we cannot see or hear you. That doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you, though. We'd love to hear from you in the Q&A. It's a little set of talk bubbles at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to pop your questions and comments in there at any time. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can following our presentations. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to our host, Paige Gardner.
Thanks. And thanks everybody for joining us. I'm very excited about this particular webinar, and it's going to be structured a little bit differently. PSG is sponsoring it, but it's really going to be a very interesting discussion between Hal Malchow and Aaron Strauss. And the topic is Hal's recent book, Reinventing Political Advertising, designed really to elect candidates by spending advertising dollars differently and more efficiently, as his theory is. Anyway, he explores new ways to think about spending on television and advertising in 2024 and beyond. Aaron is a part of Future Forward, a multi-million-dollar independent effort running ads in support of the re-election of President Biden. So there could be no one more knowledgeable and more able to ask questions of Hal and explore what he sees in his book. So there's going to be a panel discussion between Hal and Aaron after Hal gives a brief introduction to his book. As you know, both are experienced and admired strategists, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. With that, I'll turn it to Hal.
Hello, thank you for attending this webinar. I'm going to speak to a lot of issues with campaigns and campaign advertising, and a lot of data that I think you will find surprising. Hold on, let me get my. Well, now I'm looking for my. Can somebody put up the my PowerPoint?
You got it. Just give us one moment. Go ahead and keep on chatting.
All right. So as I talk about this, you'll notice that at times I will become a little aggravated, because what we're doing at the practical level in campaign advertising all across America is really at odds with a lot of the research. And you know, the bad news is that political advertising is not working well. But the good news is there are ways to improve it in large ways that are supported by data and experiments. So with that said, I'm looking for the...
Thanks for your patience, everyone. Hal, just give us one more second. They're coming up now. Thank you.
All right, fine. Okay, good. We got it. Okay, so let's start with just a few words about advertising. You know, advertising is a difficult way to change someone's mind. It's unwanted. People pay money to avoid ads on the internet and on streaming television. It's untrusted. When is the last time you heard someone say, "Oh, well, I know it's true. It was in an ad"? It also conveys, in its most conventional form, which is a 30-second ad, a limited amount of information. And we may decide war and peace and healthcare and other large and difficult issues because of advertising, which is a little ironic, but it's the main tool that we have. So if we want to win these battles, we've got to be good at it. All right. So hang on. All right. So, you know, the first question is advertising working? And I've got like a whole suitcase full of experiments that measure the effects of advertising in multiple ways. But probably the most interesting one was a meta-analysis done by two academics, Josh Kalla and David Brockman. One of the problems with measuring persuasion is you have to set up a treatment group and a control group, and you have to call the people who received the mail and those who didn't receive the mail and compare the results after the experiment has run. This is very expensive. And one of the things that that's happened as a result of that, we have a lot of experiments with small sample sizes. So if you did an experiment, you had 1,000 people, 1,000 calls in the treatment group and 1,000 calls in the control group, you know, you might have margins of error of 2 or 3 points. And 2 or 3 points in political contest are, particularly in terms of affecting political choice with advertising, is much smaller than that. You know, if you hit a percentage point, generally you're doing very well. So none of these experiments have enough volume to get accurate measurement. But here's what Kalla and Brockman did. They got data from 49 experiments, put them all together so that we have actually really clean and accurate measurements for all the experiments they were looking at. Now, they tested TV, they tested mail, they tested digital, they tested phone calls, they tested canvassing, they tested robocalls, they tested everything. And here are the results. The advertising moved voters in primaries and in ballot referendums. But the effect size in general elections was 0. 0, nothing. Now, why was that? I think there are 2 reasons. First of all, 90% of voters are voting straight party tickets. So voters are choosing parties and not candidates. The second thing is that people know a lot more about candidates in general elections than they know about ballot referendums or ballot issues and primary candidates. So, which plays into a really important theme of my book. Hold on, I'm clicking.
Hal, if you could just say next slide when you're ready for the next slide, that would be great.
Next slide.
Thank you.
All right. So political advertising is performing poorly. How can we improve the results? The next slide. All right. Step 1, we have to completely change our targeting. For decades, we've been asking the wrong question. And that question is, who is undecided? Now, this is a natural question to ask because you figure whoever is undecided, they'll be easier to move with advertising. But if you ask a more specific and relevant question, which voters are moved by advertising, we get a completely different answer. And if you ask who is moved by advertising, the answer is not the undecided voter. The answer is voters who know little about politics. Next slide. So why is that? So what changes votes, or really any opinion, is new information. The less information a voter has, the more likely that what a voter sees in an ad is going to be true, is going to be new. And the evidence on the importance of low information voters is astonishing. Let me walk you through it. New slide. One of the most interesting experiments that I read, and I read a lot of them, was a study done by 3 academics who looked at 4,500 election contests over a 10-year period and correlated the ad volume with the results of the election. And what they do, the metric they came up with is, what is the impact of a 100 ad advantage in campaigns for various office? Well, for president, It's 0.02 of a percentage point. Don't get confused by the number there. That's not 2%. It's 0.02 of a percentage point. In the for Senate races, it's 0.04. Governor, it's 6. Congress, 8. But look at the bottom. In Attorney General races, it's 0.2. It's 10 times what it is in a presidential. In a state treasurer's race, it's 19 times what it is in a presidential race. So why would this be? Well, the reason is that people know a lot about the candidates for president, but know often nothing about a candidate for state treasurer and attorney general. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing the lack of knowledge about a particular race increasing the effectiveness of the advertising. Okay, next slide. All right, here's an experiment that was done by LCV using mail and canvassing. Their metric that they used was not the information level of the voter, but the turnout probability, how likely the voter is to show up at the polls on election day. Now, so here we have, it's divided into 2 groups. Those with a turnout probability of 80% or less, and those with a turnout probability of 81% or more. And if you look at this, first of all, the voters who are most likely to show up at the polls, there was not even a positive result from the advertising. I suspect some of this difference is due to small samples, but nevertheless, these are large differences. The gap with voters who were less than an 80% chance of voting, it was 16 points difference. So what you've got here is you got a 21-point gap in the effects. And again, I suspect it's overstated probably because of a small sample, but it's still fairly significant. All right. So, but this is indirect. Turnout probabilities are suggestive, I think, of the knowledge level of a voter, but they're not perfectly correlated, and I'll show you in subsequent slides the extent to which there are exceptions, with high probability voters being low information voters. Anyway, so next slide. So there was an experiment that was done by the Pivot Group, the Voter Information Center, and some other organizations, where they tested mail in the 2016 election for president, and the mail was favoring Hillary Clinton. And so in this case, they actually measured the information level of the voters with direct questions. It was like 8 or 10 questions. Who's your congressman? Which party controls Congress? Things like that. And they gave everyone a score based on those questions. And the score was from 1 to 10. And then they looked at the results of the mailings based upon the information level of the voter. So if you're in the top third for information, the mailings did not move the needle even a percentage point. It was 0.7. If you were in the bottom third, the mailings moved support for Hillary Clinton by almost 5 points. So what you have here is the movement among low information voters, accurately measured, is 7 times the movement for the top third. Okay, that's pretty strong. Well, here comes the big kicker. Next slide. In New Mexico in 2010, and I emphasize 2010 because this data and these findings have been available to people who do targeting for 13 years. All right. And the experimental result occurred almost by happenstance. The NEA had mailed 3 mailings to their members and pulled a control group. right when they were getting ready to make the calls to see what percentage of treatment and control supported the Democratic candidate, the company doing the surveys called Todd Rogers, who was executive director of the Analyst Institute at that time. He was predecessor to Aaron Strauss. He called and he says, "Todd, you've paid for one more question than you're using. What would you like to ask?" And Todd said, "I would like to ask them whether or not they know which party controlled Congress." No one understood why Todd had suggested this question, but Todd's a pretty smart guy, and no one liked to argue with him. He's teaching at Harvard now. So here's how it broke out. About a third of the voters did not know which party controlled Congress. All of these voters were voters who had voted in 2006 and 2008. So they weren't deadbeats. They weren't low probability voters. So a third of your people who were reliable voters were great targets for the low information strategy. Well, among people overall, it moved the needle about 3 points. But among people who knew which party controlled Congress, the effect size was 0.6 of a percentage point. Among people who did not know, it was almost 19 points. 31 times the difference in movement between those who didn't know which party controlled Congress and those who did. Well, I'm going to show you an even more astonishing slide. Okay, so we've had this information for a long time, and it's powerful information, and it ought to have gotten everyone's attention, and it ought to have changed how we thought about things. No way. Give me the next slide. This slide. Okay, so if you assume that the vast majority of movement takes place among low information voters, who is the worst voter to talk to? The worst voter to talk to is a news consumer, someone who's watching the news every night. But not according to our political media people. So over the last 20 years, in congressional and gubernatorial races, the more than 50% of the ad placements took place on news programming. And then in the presidential race, it was a little lower, although it started higher. It started at almost 70%. You've got the same pattern. You know, if you took all the ad buys and instead of having a strategy, having the news programming strategy, instead of doing that, and you took these ads and placed them randomly throughout all the programs that people buy advertising on, you would double your effect size. I have no doubt about it, because we're not only targeting poorly, we're targeting the opposite of what the data shows to where we should be placing ads. I mean, we should be placing ads on Worldwide Wrestling and maybe even Hee Haw reruns. You know, I'm not sure these things are measurable. If we build a information model, we can and revise our targeting. We can have fairly accurate targeting on this issue. All right, new slide. So here's what I propose in my book. Not only do you have difference in information levels, which are powerful predictors of whether someone will move in response to advertising, you also have media habits. So some people watch 10 or 12 hours of television a day. Some people watch none. Some people spend 10 hours on the internet. Some people spend very little time on the internet. Catalyst has what they call swim lanes, where they estimate through modeling what percent, you know, how much a particular voter is watching television, how much that voter is on the internet, and also they have a readership score. all three of these scores have borne out as accurate predictors in post-election analysis. So what if we, to figure out how persuadable a voter is, instead of like pointing to the middle of the partisan scale, what if we put all three of these together? What if we had a model that estimated the information level of the voter? If we used the catalyst models that estimate the time spent with various mediums, or how open they are to reading something, and they're where they are on the partisanship scale, if that pans out. And there are all sorts of, we've got hundreds of variables, all of which could be tested to see if they're predictive. But to come up with three persuasion scores, one for digital, one for TV, and one for mail. Think about the poor campaign manager. He gets in the front of the campaign and he thinks, how much should I buy on TV? And how much should I buy on the internet? And how much should I spend on mail? If you had this kind of targeting, it would answer those questions. And so you have so many voters in digital who are at the top of the score. You've got so many voters in TV at the top of the score. Mail is probably a place where you could clean up with the people you weren't getting in the other medium, because it has total coverage. But it completely simplifies the campaign manager's job. Then, once you have that persuasion score, you multiply it times the turnout probability. To get the likelihood, this is the key question, the likelihood that the voter will move in response to a particular advertising medium and also cast a ballot in the election. This is it, right? But we don't have anything like that now. All right, next slide. Okay, step 2. There's a Republican firm, I think Public Opinion Research, that every 2 years they do a poll to measure ticket splitting in the electorate. In the 2000 elections, 36% of the voters reported that they voted for both a Democrat and a Republican. By 2020, that figure was down to 11%. All right, so if 90% of voters are choosing parties rather than candidates, why do we spend 100% of our money on candidate ads? And Aaron can speak to this a little because he's experimented in this area. But I think a head-to-head, there are two things about advertising for parties. One is a head-to-head against a candidate ad and a party ad. The party ad is going to be less, but the benefit of the party, of a party conversion as opposed to a candidate conversion, is much larger. So if you change someone's vote for a single office, you affect one office. If you change someone's party affiliation, you not only change votes across the ticket, but you also have a lasting effect. Because if you look at party registration in the states that have party registration, generally the decision to register as a Democrat or Republican or unaffiliated, this is usually lasting about 20 years. So you have bigger impact across the ballot, and you have bigger impact down the stream. There are a lot of research questions that you would need to ask and answer with this experiment. You would need to see, in the first place, were the people who were changing parties, were they already Democrats but just were registered as unaffiliated? You would have to ask, did the effect of this last into the next election? The key here is changing votes, but theoretically, this has a chance, and I believe that convincing people to change parties, particularly in this current political environment, where the Republicans have gone off the deep end and are doing a lot of things that are not popular with the electorate. I think the content opportunity is also large. All right, next. Okay. What? Yeah. Some people say, okay, you can't change someone's party affiliation with advertising. Well, take a look at this thing. Gallup does a monthly poll to measure party affiliation in America. All right. So look at this chart. Look over all the way to the left-hand side, the tallest bar. This is January of 2001, or 2021. This is when those rabble invaded the Capitol, and you had all of this coverage and controversy. Party affiliation in that month moved 13.5 points. The average movement month to month is 3.5 points. And excuse me, we don't get 3.5 points out of any advertising. It dwarfs what we're seeing in advertising, and there's a point here that is also important, and that is that if you look at this and no one's running party ads, why are voters moving? Voters are moving because of news events that motivate them. And I think one of the lessons we have to take from this is that you know, we've got to get with our advertising, get into the news cycle and react to news that is favorable to us, or news that is favorable to us, but we're not getting, but the voters are not seeing that particular piece of news. Next slide. So that leads to the idea that we should advertise, or at least test advertising, opportunistically. So the reason we don't do this is because we have a lot of experiments that show that the effect of advertising early in the cycle tends to decay. It does not always decay. There are places where it holds. And why does it hold? I think it holds because some ads are better and more effective than others. I have no more complicated explanation. But what we would do is next slide. What we would do is advertise about news events that are current and in front of the voters. So here's some examples. All Republicans in the House and Senate voted against climate change legislation. What percent of the voters know this? You know, the voters, by substantial margins, favor measures that would slow climate change. Every Senate Republican voted against the $1,400 stimulus check. Well, you know, if we try to run this ad in coming September, it's old news. But if you ran this ad while people were getting their $1,400 stimulus check, they might think less of Republicans. 2/3 of Republican congresspersons voted to overturn the 2020 election. You know, some people know that, but I doubt a majority. And finally, here's a great example of opportunistic advertising. In Phoenix, Arizona, in a major battleground state, the temperature hit 125 last summer. Well, why not, when temperatures soar to these levels, why not put up an ad that shows Republicans saying, "Oh, climate change is not real. Global warming is a fiction," and let them, you know, let them speak. And then you get to the end of the ad and you go, is global warming real? Step outside and you can decide. We need to think creatively about these events and how we get into the middle of news events or personal experiences. Next slide. All right, step 4, make your ads credible. In 2018, the Center for Voter Information, the C4 version of Voter Participation Center, tested an information-only mailing against 2 versions of traditional mail. The issues in all 3 series of mails were identical. The big difference was that information-only mailing made no endorsements, had no pictures, used plain type, and had no graphics. It also used a letter. Can we go to the next slide? There it is. Does this look like a powerful political persuasion device? Well, it worked. And here's why it worked. It worked, number one, it looks cheap. So the voter's not going, oh, what gazillionaire with weird ideas is paying for this mailing? It's the language in this mailing where we talk about gun purchases, background checks, millionaire taxes is neutral. In other words, someone who reads the description of the issue will not know which side the Center for Voter Information is taking. And we just give a yes and no answer to these 3 things. And down at the bottom, it says a candidate's position on issues sometimes is more complicated than yes or no. Here are the websites where you can find out more. And at the bottom, it says the Center for Voter Information is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that does not endorse any candidate or party. This gives this piece enormous credibility that is lacking in mailings that look like advertising and look like they were designed in Madison Avenue. All right, next. So what do we have to do to raise the level of impact in our advertising? First and most important, we need a low information model that says as to each voter on the file, this is how likely they are to have political information. We need to build a persuadability model that deals with TV, digital, and mail separately, so we can pick the medium that works best for each voter. We need to advertise to change party affiliation, and we need to test it over time. And if you're going to stay with party registration, the first step is, can you give people a mailing with a voter form and ask them to change their party registration? And how many will do it? Then you have to test whether or not these people who changed actually vote more for Democrats than people who didn't. And anyway, there's complex analysis, but if it's successful, it will be a breakthrough. Test opportunistic advertising that supplements news events, and again, testing the impact of this mail, and also what the level of decay is between the time the mailing went out and election day. I think we can take the example of the information only mailing and do congressional accountability mailings. So say you had someone who voted to overturn the election. You do the cover has a good picture, handsome picture of the congressman that you're providing information on. You turn it over, on the back it says he voted to overturn the election, and then you show by party how the 2 parties voted on this issue. And for the Republicans, you say Republicans say, and you give why they, a sentence about why they voted the way they did. And you have a sentence why the Democrats voted the way they did. Having these sentences gives credibility to the mailing. It says we're not out for one side or another. Here's what the 2 parties believe. Anyway, I think it could be a strong mailing. And finally, test credibility designed television ads. So if we have a strategy that transformed the effectiveness of mail by doing things different, why haven't we tested this on television? And Aaron, you can probably speak to this. I may be unaware of experiments that have tried this, but I watched an interactive television ad that was just a link on the Analyst Institute website. Here's how it went. You have a man, he's in the woods and he's standing in front of his tent. All of a sudden, you hear the roar of a bear. The guy goes into his tent, comes back out with a gun and points at the bear. The screen shows it says shoot the bear, don't shoot the bear, and ask the viewer to click on which result he wants. Well, I don't know what the commercial purpose of this ad was, but the design is perfect for politics. What if you took two candidates, you gave information on where they stood on gun control. You get to the end and you say, which candidate do you believe? Which position do you believe? And you can click on the pro-gun control. You can click on the anti-gun control. And then a screen comes up and it shows the totals. And if we're in charge of the targeting, we're never going to lose that particular thing. And so someone gets clean information, and then to the extent they support our position, which would be a strong majority, it confirms the viewer or the voter's position. And or if the voter took the wrong position, it criticizes it. So in the book, there are examples of how we can do credibility designed TV ads, and we need, we spend all our money on TV, most of it, and it's not working. All evidence is it's working poorly. We need to get out there and do different things and measure them and come up with better strategies. And that's my presentation.
Great. Hal, before turning it over to Aaron, I do want to say, in his usually, unprepossessing way, Hal was such a brilliant mind and force behind the success and strategy of both the Voter Participation Center and the Center for Voter Information. And he helped us through the mail develop one of the first and now crude lower information models to identify those kinds of voters. And we did have great success with it. So I want to turn it over to Aaron, but I do want to recognize just how much Hal has contributed to so many organizations and to the Democratic cause.
Well, that's where I want to start too. And thanks, Paige, for having me. Hal, I reread your book this morning. Was just blown away by how much it covers. Bravo on that accomplishment. But as Paige was saying, you spent many years as a consultant striving to use this evidence in your programs, innovating. Now you're retired. So can you spill the tea, as the kids say these days? What stories do you have? Because I always find the truth is more easily swallowed when it comes wrapped in a story. So tell us a story from your time as a political consultant where you had this evidence, but people weren't listening, or only a minority of folks were listening, or something like that, to give us a sense. And one of the questions, the very first questions came in from Jessica, was about, tell me this is getting to Democratic leadership. I think it could help people understand status quo bias and issues with having people adopt evidence-based strategies.
Well, yeah, I think I was pretty much the first one out there who was talking about moving from precinct-based targeting to individual targeting. And, take, for example, voter turnout. We used to mail everybody in we'd mail everyone in a low turnout precinct. In a high turnout precinct, we'd mail nobody. But we had information about whether they were voting or not. And it seemed to me, this is a 30-second conversation, but it really took about 12 years. And I had, even within my own firm, struggles. I had one partner who's a great guy. I love him, but his opinion was all this targeting stuff is over the top, and he wouldn't use it. So I bought him out. There were a lot of instances. I would go around Washington and I had this PowerPoint, and I would visit with the pollsters and other people and show them the PowerPoint about how individual targeting was better. And everybody nod their head and they go, "Wow, that's great." But no one took it to their clients. So I wrote a book, The New Political Targeting. And I thought, oh, if 50 people read this book, but it's the right 50 people, it might move the needle. Well, I sold 5,000 of these books, which I think did help move the needle.
When I was coming up as a young buck, political Democratic operative using data, I read that book, and it really, thank you. And it really, I feel like it's a bookend. It's New Political Targeting, and this one could have been called New Political Advertising, but you chose Reinventing for the title. Okay, so as I read your book, I agree with so much of it. But Paige said that I had to disagree with a bit of it to make this exciting.
No, you don't have to.
No, I don't. All right, so here's the part I disagree with. And you mentioned it. It's on the party advertising. It is a really interesting hypothesis, and I like it as a hypothesis. I don't think the evidence has borne it out, though. And I want to differentiate two things here. On the first part, which we'll set aside, is changing people's party registration, which, of course, you can only do it in a set of states with party reg. I think there hasn't been nearly enough research here. When I was executive director of the Analyst Institute, you and I were absolutely on the same page here. I was shaking those trees, beating those bushes, trying to find some money to do for somebody to do this innovative test. And I still don't think it's been done. So let's put that aside if we could get people to change their party reg. But in all 50 states, we can run advertising to get somebody to change their party identification, just who they believe themselves without a piece of paper, that which party they trust more on, across the board. The issue that I take is when you put up that slide about party registration changing, there was this massive spike around January 6th that then faded, right? It's that advertising didn't do that, a massive event did. And how do you think advertising can even move the atmospherics, right? A 30-second ad that people will forget pretty quickly can change lasting party ID seems an incredible challenge and really expensive, because you sort of have to do it nationally, because the thought process is, if we're targeting to specific districts or states with specific elections, then we should talk about those candidates, because the evidence that I have looked at based on your hypothesis, launched at Future Forward, we launched this investigation, the talking about a candidate is going to be better than talking about a party for that specific candidate. And you're right that the party can move multiple races, but of course, because of gerrymandering, we don't always have these overlapping races in one area. So I think it comes back to the question of what you were saying with that Gallup chart. Do you really think advertising can change the atmospherics nationwide for any sort of reasonable cost?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, the first question is, if we do this, will it work? And will it work means, will people change their party registration, or in a post-mailing poll, will they change their party affiliation? Then the second question is, how much will that affect votes at the ballot box? And and that's a question. I don't doubt that candidate ads are more effective in the short term. The question is, what with changing parties, what is the long term here, and what's the benefit over time? And there's a lot of steps to even get to the benefit over time, but But if 90% of the voters are choosing parties and not candidates, and we have a Republican Party that is off the reservation on almost all issues, this is worth trying. And I think you could try it in one state. If it worked in one state, then you try it in others. I'm not sure you have to have.
Can we pull up, I don't know who has your slides handy, but can we go back to that Gallup chart
Yeah.
on party reg or party affiliation?
Yeah.
It's going to take us just a minute. So y'all
Okay.
keep chatting and we'll pull it up. So.
Okay.
Okay. So what
No,
we're going to see, I'll preview it. So I'll tee it up. January 6th happens. One political party in this country tries a coup, basically, right? Goes against democracy. And you see this spike in Democratic advantage. And the Republicans don't throw out Donald Trump, who led the coup, right? They doubled down on it, right? They're like, actually, this was the right thing to do because supposedly the 2020 election was stolen. Yeah, so an entire political party goes against democracy. And it's 3 to 4 months later that it's down under 5%. And if you take that next spike, right, it's a half a year later that it dissipates. And that's a coup attempt, right? So I just think that advertising will decay over time, just like January 6th does. And I'm skeptical that is going to work. And if you do it a year in advance, a year later in a close election, that effect will stick around.
Yeah, Aaron, you may be right. I think what I advocate in the book is testing this and getting, you might just send a letter and ask people to change party registration and know right away that this doesn't work. But it's probably a more complicated journey. And but if 90% of the voters are choosing parties and not candidates, I think this needs to be tested.
Okay, maybe we should go to the audience page. I have one more question, but if we should go to audience, it's up to you.
Okay. Why don't you ask your question? But to the party point, I think maybe there's an intersection between opportunistic advertising to really solidify what's happened and the views and the values of people that are so, what the Republicans are doing is so abhorrent. And so if you use, as you say in your book, these opportunities to solidify and educate people about what they're really doing, then maybe that's the sweet spot between party advertising and opportunistic events.
Paige,
no, I agree.
Do we only have 11 minutes left?
Okay, no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Now, it wouldn't move.
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
So if we only have 11 minutes left, then let's go. I see 6 Q&As from the audience. I've talked a lot. Let's go to the audience.
Okay, Patricia, do you want to tee up some questions?
Yep, here we go. Okay, so I'm gonna put together a couple of questions that are thematically similar. One is from Lou and one is from Patricia. Essentially, they're asking about other formats. So Lou is asking about, what about radio? Why don't consultants place ads on radio? And Patricia is asking if you've gotten any research on billboards.
Yeah, I'm not aware of research on billboards. But I can say, and there's not a lot of measurement on the radio, but I do have a short chapter on radio, and what it essentially says is that radio has been on the ascendancy in rural and small town communities, particularly where the weekly newspaper or the daily newspaper has disappeared. So I think particularly for that segment of the electorate, it's probably a pretty effective way to reach voters. There's a little bit of a myth that once you get in the rural areas, there are no Democrats. Doc Schweitzer has a chart that shows among people in a small town, say 20 to 40,000, there are more Democrats than Republicans. But the registration at levels lower than that is predominantly Republican. So parts of that is in play, and the radio is probably a good, convenient, and cost-effective way to reach those voters.
Yeah, I've looked into both these. Radio's absolutely underinvested in, and I think people are glomming onto that, and it will be more so this year. Billboards are extremely hard to measure, even with randomized controlled trials, because you don't know who saw the billboards. The evidence is very mixed. My personal opinion is that it's tough for the billboard to be noticeable. What happens is, from what I was talking to people, is that after the billboard changes and it's new, it's really, and you see it once, it's really easy to just ignore it on your same drive over and over again and completely put it out of your mind. So it's not really in front of people. It doesn't really force them to look at it. So, but I'm open to more evidence. It's just so hard to measure billboards. It's really tricky.
Aaron, can I ask you some follow-on questions related to that? You were talking about billboards and people drive past them and they change. What about lawn signs?
I've done a lot of research on lawn signs. The evidence is somewhat mixed as well, unfortunately. Not a slam dunk. Here's what I would say on yard signs. You got a yard sign and a road sign, not necessarily in people's yards, but on the side of the road that people are going to drive by and they're going to see, especially the first time you put them up. You might as well put more than your name on the yard sign, unless you're running for school board and truly no one knows who your name is. Anything at all, congressional, even state ledge and up, Senate, presidential for sure. That space on that sign, please put a message there. I think I was affected growing up in Virginia when Jim Gilmore ran for governor with an incredibly effective 3-word slogan, which was no car tax. And that was on every single sign. And I don't know, the evidence is not sure if that putting it on the sign is a good thing, but I can tell you that having a 3-word message is a very good thing for low information voters, as Hal's saying, for them to remember it. And if you've got that, put it on your sign. You might as well.
Yeah, and here I am still paying a car tax every year in Virginia. Thanks, Aaron. Hal, Alex is asking about the CVI mailing that you were sharing. Do you happen to remember if there was any special message or something on the envelope to ensure or encourage that the envelope was opened?
No, it didn't go in an envelope. It was just an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper folded in half and tabbed. The mailing panel said,
Hal, you might want to explain what a tab is. I'm not sure. I bet people don't know what that is.
A tab is one of those little plastic things that you fold over on when there are 2 loose sides that holds it together. Now, what was your question again? I got sidetracked.
The question was about an envelope, and you were telling us that there actually wasn't an envelope.
No envelope.
So what is it just a blank piece of paper? Is there something on the outside? I think is really the question. What gets the person to open it?
It says the outside. It's in the upper left corner. It says Center for Voter Information with an address, but the address is an address that's a local address and not Washington D.C. And then it has the person's mailing information and then an indicia in the upper right that covers the postage. So it was as simple as you could imagine.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, another question for you, Hal, and then Aaron, I'm sure you'll have an opinion about this as well. Christian is asking, isn't it more strategic to invest in Get Out the Vote than it is TV ads? And do you think maybe the problem is that political consultants don't get a commission from Get Out the Vote?
Well, that certainly could affect some decisions. I think the returns on persuasion are small, but the returns on the Get Out the Vote stuff is small. I think in a presidential election, and if you do social pressure mail, which is the mail where you show someone's voting record and you do a little chart that shows how it compares with the rest of the community, this is in a presidential election, this is 0.7. in an election for state legislature, it might be a point and a half, but it's not large, and it's certainly in the range of it's in the range of effects that you get from persuasion. So I don't know that one is better than the other. As to persuasion, a lot of whether that is better depends on the issues you have, and is it a strong message or is it a weak message?
I'm going to
have
channel
more variation in the effects of the persuasion.
I am going to channel my inner Hal Malchow, and you're right. I could talk about this question for an hour, and say that yes, GOTV would be better if the consultants followed the evidence as Hal does and send social pressure mail. But way too often, GOTV programs are designed without cost efficiency and efficacy in mind, similar to the lack of testing back in the day on TV ads. For TV ads, they work. And I think the evidence in that is Hal's slide on the TV ads effectiveness on every level, as opposed to the Brockman-Kalla zero finding, which I don't think is exactly zero. All of those numbers were positive. When you get up to the presidency, they're close to zero, but they're close to zero per 100 ad errors. And with the campaign being flush and the super PACs being flush, you can have a lot of 100 ad airings, and those small numbers can add up. And so I would say I've done the math on this exact question, and the answer is if you follow the exact best practices from the evidence, yes, GOTV is more cost effective, but you run out of cost effective ways to GOTV pretty quickly, and TV is more scalable, and TV still works. It's not quite as cost efficient as the best GOTV program, but it can absorb a lot of dollars, and those small effects can add up over and over and over again over those lots of dollars, and that's exactly why campaigns invest in it. But as Hal says, we need to do a lot of testing to make sure those ads are effective.
Thanks for keeping that brief, Aaron. I also want to acknowledge we've got comments in the Q&A from Kate and Julie. I want to thank you for those comments. Unfortunately, we're running short of time, so I won't be able to engage with those two comments, but they are there. Please, everybody, take a look, take a read. And I want to bring Paige back on the screen as we come to our final moments here together, and invite any final words.
Thank you, Hal, and thank you, Aaron. This was a great discussion, and everybody needs to read Hal's book. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you all for those great questions.
Yeah. Thank you.